Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today from all around the world for what will be a terrific conversation with our special guest, June Odongo, on how opening up learning can close knowledge gaps. My name is Chris Capozzola, and here at MIT, I'm our Senior Associate Dean at Open Learning. And this is the first in a new open conversation series that focuses on the experiences and impact of open learning for empowering people to improve their lives, communities, and the world. And as we set out to craft this new open conversation series, one person we really wanted to talk to is June Odongo. June is an innovative entrepreneur, a founder, and now the CEO of Senga Technologies, a logistics software and services company in Kenya, catering to businesses that ship in Africa. Today, she'll share her insights on learning, entrepreneurship, and the role of open education in upskilling and changing our world. So June, thank you so much for speaking with me and our audience today. Your experience is truly inspiring.
Thank you so much. I didn't know I was your first. Thank you. It's an honor.
Yeah. Yes. No, it's been great to sort of hear and learn about the work that you've been doing over the last few years. And I wanted to just kick it off by asking you to tell us about your personal learning journey.
Mm-hmm. Um, well, let me tell a little bit about my background, which actually connects somehow with OCW. In terms of my education, I have a computer science degree from UMass Lowell, which is about 40 minutes or so from MIT. Many of my university professors were actually MIT computer science graduates. And I also have an MBA from the Harvard Business School. In terms of how I summarize my learning journey, a combination of formal education, as I've just described, and then just, complementing my education here and there. I think because of these lecturers that I had who had been at MIT, and we were a lot of our coursework was actually mimicking MIT classes, right? So when it came to studying, by the way, I went to, if I can date myself, I was in undergrad. I graduated in 2005, so a long time, quite a long time ago. And that's actually how I came upon open learning, um, effectively to complement what I knew the MIT students were studying, to help me perform better.
You started by taking some courses on MIT OpenCourseWare, but you certainly didn't stop, right? And so you've definitely been engaged in sort of online learning, continuous learning, upskilling throughout your career, even after sort of two really significant degrees. So what motivates you to keep learning, right? You're a busy professional. How do you make the time? Why is it important to you?
Oh, I almost feel like there's no choice, right? I mean, like in our company, for example, we're trying to apply technology to some very complex, you know, com, you know, com, computing problems, I would say, or mathematics problems in logistics, right? So I also, by the way, I should say this. I happen to be one of those people who I apply so much of what I learned in uni, both in undergrad and graduate school. Like oftentimes people say, oh, whatever I learned, I'm not using. I am the exact opposite of that, right? So building on that is, context, right? The way we think about, I think the way I fundamentally think about problem solving is the same, but the context is constantly changing, right? There's new ways of solving some of the same problems, or if you're encountering a new problem, you need a new way to think about it, right? And the solution can either come from you, you can borrow from other people, right? And if you're borrowing from other people, it could be traditional, it could be new, right? And the way to get that information is to insert yourself, into materials talking about how other people are thinking about these things, or even enhancing your own knowledge if you're trying to come up with your own solution. So for me, I just think I have absolutely no choice but to continue learning. And in our company, our team members are quite young. Um,
Mhm.
Oftentimes they're recent university graduates. Um, I do not write software anymore. I used to.
Mhm.
I just don't. So one of the things, for example, I'm trying to do is, we're using languages that I didn't use, or, when I was a student. Like I think we used C or something in computer science. I'm using Ruby. I need to learn how to use Ruby on Rails. But more importantly, we're also trying to apply technologies that have advanced significantly in the 2 decades since I've been outside of school, right? Whether
Mhm.
it's things around machine learning, artificial intelligence, and so on. So some of the work I have to do in terms of learning is relearning what I learned in school. So
Mhm.
I actually go through some of my old curricula and then introducing new concepts, on top of that. So it's just embedded in, I think learning has to be embedded in what we're trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. I think it reminds us that that the education that we get with our degrees, for those of us who have had the opportunity to study, right, is sometimes a set of concrete skills, but it's really
Mhm.
just an investment in our future, right? But if
Mhm.
you don't keep, if you don't keep investing, right, if you don't sort of
Mhm.
keep watering the plant, right, it won't continue to grow.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
that's really neat. So
Mhm.
you've talked a little bit about some of the work that your company does, right?
Mhm.
Senga Technologies, and the ways that technology and software solutions to logistics problems are part of the work that everyone in your company does.
Mhm.
But you've also, in other discussions that we've had, sort of reflected that it's been difficult to come by software developers, right? To hire, recruit, train, retain them.
Mhm.
So tell us a little bit more about how you've managed not only to sort of continue your own education, but to kind of build this up for your all the people who are part of your team.
Mhm. So it's less an issue of finding software developers because there are actually plenty of them here, but more about finding software developers we can afford.
Mm, mhm,
In an era where software engineers are such a hot commodity, right? And you bring them up, and Google or Microsoft or whatever comes and snaps them. So for us, it was actually more, the issue was more resource constraint, right? Not be, when I started this company initially, I was bootstrapping it using my savings.
mm,
And then when we got initial funding, um, it wasn't a super substantial amount. So we've had to run a really, really lean company, right? And that meant we couldn't afford senior developers and so on. And then even if we could, there's because of how hot the market was for engineers, they likely wouldn't have lasted because there's always
mhm,
somebody who can pay them more. So the approach I took was to hire very high potential younger people, right? So fresh computer science graduates, folks who were just graduating or had been out of school for no more than 3 years.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so that was the fundamental problem. And then the way OCW actually came into the Senga story, it was not intentional at all. So what happened was there was a candidate who had been recommended by one of our engineers. She was an electrical engineer,
mhm,
and she was very, very green, and we initially rejected her application, right? So her name is Cynthia, and the person who had recommended Cynthia is called Warren. So I got back to, I did, so I reject her, and she doesn't say anything. Much
mhm.
like how I used to be when I was a candidate. I don't take rejection very well. Maybe I don't know, maybe she was nonchalant, who knows? But in any case, I get back to Warren and I'm like, hey, so this is the feedback on your friend, she's just too green, and and he says she's really high potential. Like, you need to just think about that again. So we go back and I talked to Cynthia, and she was designing some kind of hardware board somewhere. And I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool for someone who's barely out of school. And I just, and I thought, okay, she was very, very bright. What she didn't have was a computer science degree, which for us is very, very critical in our company because we are applying algorithms, complicated algorithms, and complicated math. And I just thought, well, when I was a student, there was this resource called OCW that I used, where you could learn some of these things, right? They were complementary to these textbooks. So I
Hmm.
just suggested to her, hey, you could join Senga if you're willing to quit your job and do this for 6 months. And I created a curriculum for her, which actually mimicked the last 2 years of the computer science program. And she said yes. And and then we ended up finding this path of bringing on board, otherwise talented individuals who, for one reason or another, do not have the education we need, right? So as of today, we've done, so Cynthia, she did that program in 2020, was it last year? Maybe a little bit, maybe I think she started end of 2022. No, end of 2023, because this is her first full year actually as an engineer at Senga. And then we've since put two other individuals through that program, right? The second person we put through is actually not a full university graduate. He's
Hmm.
someone who comes from an under-resourced background, but had the desire to be an engineer, had gone to a coding boot camp. Coding boot camps for us do not give folks what they need, at least for what works in our company. We put him through that, and then we've since put in someone else who has has sort of like a similar skill set. So we've been able to complement, our team. So half our team is from this program.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And that's exactly the kind of story that makes us excited at Open Learning. It's the kind of thing that motivates the staff who work here and certainly the faculty at MIT who share these materials. They don't have to do that. They don't get paid to do that. They sort of sharing these materials in order for other people to use them. Now, it sounds like the special sauce, right, that comes from Senga Technologies, from June Odongo, is your work in identifying from this big curriculum of materials exactly what's valuable for you and your firm and your team. So that's some really amazing work. Uh, it does raise for me another question. I've taken courses, watched videos and lectures from OpenCourseWare, and some of them are really hard. And some of those problem sets that we share with the world are really difficult. So I'm curious, you're the staff who you've kind of shared this curriculum with. Do they think it's too hard? Do they think it's hard and fun? What's been their reaction?
It's hard. I mean, they're very complex courses. I mean, networking theory, algorithms. I don't know if they consider it fun.
Hmm.
Uh, no one's told me they find it fun. But one thing that's universal amongst them is that the amount of learning they get is so, so, so significant, you know, just in a span of 6 months,
Hmm.
right? So I think they feel better about themselves, in terms
Hmm.
of what they're capable, even from a learning perspective.
Hmm.
Mhm.
There must be at a moment in their work or even in your own where that light bulb goes off, right? Where you're just dealing with some really tricky work problem, right? And then suddenly, you realize that you have the tools, right? Because of a course that you took through OpenCourseWare or something else, right?
Mhm. Yeah, you've reminded me of something. So the team member who recommended Cynthia was also mentoring her during that process. And one of the courses is something called Automata. I forget the full name of the course. And whatever problem he was working on at the time, he was like, oh goodness, like, there was something in the automata class that he was helping Cynthia with that he
Hmm.
recognized could help him solve a problem that he was working on.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's
Nice.
almost like it's almost like this extended hook in the learning, right? It's not just for the person who's going through it, because what we also do is we want them to present to us something at the end of the coursework, right, on
Mhm.
some topic. So in Cynthia's case, for example, it was graph theory, right? Like, could you tell us what you learned on in graph theory, right? So what happens is there's a relearning also for someone like me, and
Mhm.
then um, I remember there's some algorithm, I forget which algorithm she presented, and I was like, oh my God, this is an insight I had in terms of, these kinds of like nodes I was thinking about in sort of the network design for the logistics. And I couldn't remember that, I had been taught this. I don't even know if I was
Mhm.
taught it, but I was like, it was very validating for me because I'm like, oh wow, I recognize something by myself that is in a that is in a textbook.
Yeah.
you know. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No,
And that it feels pretty great.
I love it. I love it. It's and that's a part of the joy of teaching and learning,
Yeah.
right? And some of that happens in the classroom, but it happens our whole lives, right? So let me turn now and ask sort of the bigger question. I've shared a little bit about why MIT does this, the big so what question, right? And I want to hear from you a little bit about the kind of impact that you try to have. I mean, you have not just developed a company, you've been involved in and starting nonprofits. You've been trying to make an impact in the world. And I wonder what advice you would give to other people, right? To the younger version of yourself, right? Or someone who's out there today, for how they could, how they can make a difference.
I think the impact question is big. Um, I don't know what I would tell my younger self, but I think I can think of what to tell other folks, which is for me, there are certain kinds of the ideas or problems that latch onto me so viscerally that I feel I have no choice but to get involved in solving the problem or addressing the problem. And when I have that emotion, um, I just pursue the emotion. I think that's sort of behind the nonprofit. So the nonprofit we have is called Zoo Memorial Foundation. And what we do is we equip community centers and schools in very rural, underserved places with computers and computing education. And that is linked to my dad. So my dad was an electrical engineer. Unfortunately, he died when I was quite young, like more than 20 years ago. But I would hear stories of folks saying, "Oh, he showed me my first computer," or, "The first time I touched with a computer was with your dad, or he taught me this, or whatever." Um, and I wanted to do something, you know, to continue, let's call it his work. And that's how, and a little tiny story. I worked for this company called EMC in Hopkinton, a data storage company that's now acquired by Dell. And it was Earth Day, and they were recycling computers. Like, there was some email where computers were being recycled. And can I just say, I was crying at my desk, had broken up with some person. And I see this email, I'm like, wait, I stopped crying. And I'm like, I know what we could do with those computers. And those computers end up, long story short, we end up kicking off the nonprofit that way by refurbishing these things. With the company, in terms of how I got interested in logistics, I just was so frustrated. I was moving quite a bit in a short period, and just moving was so awful. And I was like, people have been moving since time immemorial. Like, why does moving suck so much? And I just got sucked into logistics. Not that I had necessarily a passion for logistics, but it was a nagging problem. And then I'm also very big on not regretting things. I'm very big on the regret minimization thing. So I tend to just ask myself at any given point, like, if life ended today, like, would I feel okay about where my life has reached? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. And I find it's yes when I feel I've done something that was meaningful to me and seen it through completion or a good outcome or something that could continue. And I find that it's no when I'm in the middle of something. I'm like, oh, wait, I have this thing to do.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So for me, yeah, I just move with what grips me, I think, or I would say.
Man, no, that's a fantastic story. That I appreciate that. Those kind of personal connections that whether it's with a family, with just a moment that hits you, that that we feel things and then we reach out, right, and act on them, and build, either as individuals or with others. Um, is there a role for open education, in moving from that visceral feeling to the doing?
I mean, for sure. But I will just add just one point to my earlier one is to also just go for it, even if you don't know how it's going to end up. So in the story of the nonprofit, what I did was I just wrote the company back and I said, could you give me those computers? And then before I knew it, they were interested in the idea. Then me and my colleagues were refurbishing the computers, and then they were donating money. Like I just never foresaw that. I was just like, give me the computer. So folks should just start. And then in terms of with open learning, so after at some point, I think earlier in the year, like late last year, maybe a year ago, I did a LinkedIn post about the coursework. Um, and the response was pretty good in that folks said, we didn't know we could learn this way, or, can you show me where I could complement this, where I could mine courses for my company. So a friend of mine, for example, runs a rose farm in Kenya, and she's in agriculture, so her problems are different. And she asked if I could help figure out how they could also use open learning, right? In her case, it's a company of 800 people, many of them are farm workers, right? So how one would think about what kinds of lessons one could glean from something such as open learning is, very different. It's a very, very wide scope. So for me, I think it's pretty applicable in just about every scenario, right? There are classes on how to think, making decisions, for example. Like for me, I have this deep interest in behavioral economics, just how one thinks about, when you're building technology, but the behavior of folks, which is
Mhm.
always not how we think about things rationally. Like how do you think about this? So for me, in almost every setting, I think somebody can find something in open learning that's going to complement that thinking, whether it's something pretty basic or something pretty advanced.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
No, that's inspiring, and I'll borrow that line. Just start. No, we'll sort of. I think a lot of people will take that away from our conversation. And speaking of all those other people, it's time now, I think, to pivot. And now I think it would be a great chance for us to take some questions from the audience. All right. So, June, I wanted to just start with one question that came in from the audience, from one of our online, from Mary, who was listening in and hearing about the ways in which you've talked about how you've upskilled your workers and yourself on the technical front. But one thing that Mary's asking is how or what recommendations you would have for helping people develop their social skills in communication, in leadership, in networking. Have you found resources to do that? And have you done that in your own work? And have you helped people in Senga Technologies do that as well?
Hmm. Okay, so I think, hi, Mary. First, thank you for your question. So for communication, I think many of my colleagues used to do Toastmasters, and that worked for them. So
Mm-hmm.
if Toastmasters is around you somewhere, I would recommend that, because I think many people can write well or communicate through writing. And it's sort of, communicating verbally or in public spaces or in meetings that tends to be difficult, maybe because of confidence or that kind of a thing. So I would recommend something as simple as Toastmasters.
Mm-hmm.
Something that was useful to me was learning tips on something called executive presence. I remember looking at executive presence tips very early in my career. Things like, sit up, when you're talking, um, how you should stand and things like that. For me, I found those to be super, super, super valuable. especially in the early days when trying to establish my career. For my team, I think the current generation is facing, I think, a different set of communication problems, I think, than that we used to face. For us, it used to be a lot about public speaking, but I think because of a lot of social media and so on, what I see commonly is writing challenges, right? Or being very curt in writing, very, very brief. So for our team, the thing that I'm usually pushing on is just written communication, right? No, I don't like to see slides or that sort of a thing. I want someone to express their idea in writing and with the correct spelling and things like that, and I will send it back if it is not, if it doesn't meet that standard. Yeah, so I think it just depends on, where someone is in the career, what their background is, and so on. And just also observing if there's someone who one admires, who speaks well, I think there's nothing wrong in emulating that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that among other things, one of our most popular videos on MIT OpenCourseWare is from the late Professor Patrick Winston, entitled "How to Speak," and it's been picked up, millions of times, millions of views, and I think it's just an indication of the importance not only of mastering technical content or business content or other things, but actually being able to express it and to share it, right?
I'll look for it now.
Yeah. But you had mentioned actually, the importance of emulating a public speaker as one path toward developing someone's personal public speaking skills, and that brings me to another question. This came in from Rodrigo, who has also joined us online and sent this via email, who asks, "Who was your most influential professor?" Right. So who most influenced you as you were learning, and whether that was in the classroom or outside?
Hi, Rodrigo. That is a difficult question. I got along so well with my professors and even professors in my school who were not teaching me directly. Like one of the people I think who was most impactful to me was this guy called Professor Maloney, who worked at EMC, which I ended up joining. He was not my professor, but we got along, and then I got an internship at EMC that I ended up not taking, and then I got a full-time position, and I don't think I would have gotten that without him, because I had not imagined working for a company like that or an industry like that. Yeah, I think Fred Martin is someone who stands out to me. Oh my goodness, he was an MIT grad, actually. I think now he might be dean of the CS department of University of Texas at Austin. Yeah, so I didn't really enjoy very much my hardware courses, but he was my professor and he made it fun, and I did well, and I think I purely did well because he was great. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I love academia. I love many people, so I really cannot pick just one person. I cannot.
No, that's a great point. In many ways, part of the joy of learning is learning from different people in different ways, right? And so sometimes there is one individual teacher or professor who makes that huge difference, but sometimes it's the range of them that makes all the difference in the world, and why we need to kind of keep learning and keep finding new voices, new mentors as we move in different parts in our lives. Nice. So one thing, another question that has come in, and I think this is really important for a valuable sort of insight that might be valuable to other people who are looking to use sort of MIT's open resources in training employees in their organization, which is the question of assessing the impact, right, and the learning, right? So a lot of our course offerings, particularly on MIT OpenCourseWare, they're open, they're self-paced. There's no sort of necessarily metrics of whether you've passed or failed, right? Our MITx courses do have assessments. They do have certificates for people who complete them. But for you, as manager and as the CEO, how did you know? How did you measure, or did you that your employees, when they were using MIT's open resources, were mastering the material, that they were learning to apply it, and they actually really were making a difference in their work.
Mm-hmm. Well, in our case, I would say there were three kinds of measures, though I think one is not, I don't know how useful it was, which was, do the exercises in the course, don't just listen to the classes, do the exercises and then report. It was self-reporting, which is why, I don't know how, I don't know what we can say about that, but self-report on how you performed. Because at some point, answers are given and you can see whether you got something correct, right? So that was one. And then the second measure was actually the pace of learning, right? One can tell how one is doing, based on whether somebody is like taking too long or something like that, just like what's going on. And then also asking questions because we are familiar with the material, because we are technologists. And then also asking the team member who's going through it to present on a key topic at the end of it, right? So to present well, you need to at least master at a theoretical level what it is you're going to present,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Because all of us gather together and you need to make a case and we're learning and asking questions that we want answers from. So those were some of the ways to measure. And then the last one I would say is just, application, because our ultimate intention is that the way of thinking about a problem is reshaped. So then the proof of the learning is in the pudding, right? Which is your actual output once you start solving problems within the team.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I think.
And I just want to add something on this. So one of my very close friends is I was about to say he's a CTO, but he's now a CEO at this financial technology firm here that's doing really well. And he has helped recruit just about every engineer in our company. And we've been talking about recruitment a lot because of these GPTs that help people, answer questions. Like once upon a time, you could give a coding exam, and you know, you watch somebody do it, and now somebody can do it online, and and then credentials, like I've mentioned before, I think even early in this chat, that having a computer science degree is very important to us. Like he challenged me on that actually quite a bit. And he is someone who also holds like a master's and, a bachelor's and master's in computer science. We're changing the way we hire to test problem solving, right? And yeah, so it's actually no longer about credentials, because we have had experience, and I think many employers have had this, where folks can have the most amazing credentials and they still can't do the work, right? And what I'm finding also is folks who are self-directed and have a lot of deep interest. And I think this was true too when I was an engineer myself. The best engineers ended up being folks who just, for whatever reason, they chose that career and they didn't actually necessarily go through a machine like me for, learning, right? For whatever reason, they just had this like deep passion and they opted in, right? And I think that's where something such as open learning becomes very powerful. And actually, someone added me on LinkedIn. And when I looked at his profile, he had switched his career into finance or something just from open learning. Like I literally just looked up his profile yesterday, right? Complete switch of a career, right? So um, people see good work, people see good work. The world is changing. It's hard to argue with folks who work hard.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think those are great points, and I think the proof is in the pudding, as you say, right? And I would also pull out the importance of knowing that someone has learned it by having them present on it, right? They always say, right, the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? And to be able to teach it to others, and also that sort of self-pacing, self-ownership, right? So it's in some ways you're opening learning opportunities to people in your firm, but it's really up to them, right? To track their progress, to apply it, and that's the best way for them to learn it. But I think the number one thing I'll take from what you just said is that phrase opt in, right? Sort of just opting into learning, to curiosity is really key to what it means to be an agile worker in the 21st century, right? These technologies are changing so rapidly, and that even the best degrees won't last anyone for a lifetime anymore if they ever did, right? Okay, so let's, I want to switch now to a little bit, some of the questions that have been coming in are really about you and your work and your journey, so I'm going to sort of turn some of those to you right now. And so one of the things that comes from Mark along the way is a question about what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned as an entrepreneur? You've reflected a little bit in our conversation about sort of being an entrepreneur. What's one that you would share with Mark?
Oh, Mark, hi. That is a tough question. Most valuable. So first, I think entrepreneurship is more, for me, it's like a career of the heart. Because it's just so difficult to be an entrepreneur. Like, everyone's read about, the roller coaster emotions and, the, difficulty in maybe getting financing and, product market fit and all these things. The reality is much tougher than one will ever read anywhere. Or even if you have friends who are entrepreneurs and you are observing them, it's just one of those things where you can't actually explain what it's like to be an entrepreneur. You just have to experience it. And that's why I think, like, my mom is a businesswoman, and there's a time she had told me, like, the things she's pursued, it's when she can't sleep over something, right? And it's persistent, and she just cannot run away from, an idea. And, I think entrepreneurship, is or should be driven by that kind of thing, a kind of obsession, because there's so many things that are happening to make you want to quit, right? And just to give you an idea, like, I know very many entrepreneurs. I know entrepreneurs who do not have resources, who have a lot of resources, but all of them sort of suffer the same. The kinds of emotions they suffer are universal, right? So I think if it's not driven by something internal, it can be very challenging. I mean, of course, there are people who are just super rational about it and they have a time plan, and, in 3 years they're out, and, they've sold the company and whatever, they know how to do it like an assembly line. But yeah, I would say, yeah, I think the heart piece is probably for me, it's the thing that's kept me going. And therefore I would say, that's the lesson.
Oh, that's fantastic. That sticking to it, right, is really important. And that's so that's also a question that comes in from YouTube, from Christopher, who asks, how do you stick to your learning goals, right? So in some ways, it's that related question, right? Is the answer there the same?
Hi, Chris. I think let me talk a little bit about my primary learning right now, which is reading a lot of biographies from founders.
Okay.
And found a podcast. Like, I love this podcast called Founders, which is, and in the definition, founder is not just someone who started an enterprise, but, historical people who've just done enormous things. So it's anyone from a Rockefeller to Oprah, just standouts. And So I'm a bit obsessed with that. And so basically this guy called David Senra just summarizes these books. So I end up buying some of those books and then subscribing to something called Founder's Notes, which is a summary of the books, and I literally have like 5 of those like up on my screen all the time just to refer to.
Mhm.
I'm not measuring my learning right now as something around breadth, right? So it's not, I don't need to have like a wide scope. For me, it's like the depth of something. And sometimes it's just a singular concept that I'm sticking on. Um, and then that concept is changing because sometimes it's something about like, what makes a great team, but sometimes it's how do you apply technology, like in our case, even internally, not just externally for our customers. And then, I'd mentioned, for example, I like something like behavioral economics. So I have Richard Thaler's book, right?
Mhm.
And then there's just a set of books that I just keep in front of me, even if I haven't read them. Sometimes I'll just pick and try to go and see if it's referring to something. So I don't have a specific goal. I would say for me, it's a moving target. And then I just find that at any time when I'm struggling with a particular concept, for whatever reason, if something pulls me to it,
Mhm.
like we're building some kind of a document reader using something called Clover AI. I think I saw someone post on LinkedIn like this paper by these students,
Mhm.
and I was like, oh, let me just read this. And then it ends up being this thing that's now a very, very key part of what we're offering as a company. So yeah, so it's sometimes it's just clicking now. I don't have a calendar. I don't have a list of things I have to learn.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's good to know. That's good to know because I think for someone who's hearing your story, right, imagines that that it's all very disciplined, all very by the book. So it's very heartening to know that sometimes you just fall down a rabbit hole, right,
Yeah.
and just discover, right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good because that's actually one of the questions that came in on YouTube from Agye was asking about whether it's better to be more systematic or to go down these numerous rabbit holes. And I think I'll take a stab at answering that question. That I think it's important to do a little bit of both, right? That
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there is a need if you know that there's a particular skill, right, that you need to master, right, to try to find a path to doing that, right? And here in Open Learning, we're sort of developing and we'll be rolling out sort of new tools for people who come to our website to actually find guided pathways through our learning,
Mm-hmm.
through their own learning journeys, right? So if they say, I want to understand, this corner of data science, or I really need for my work to be able to understand, how vaccines work, right? And that'll be coming over the course of the next year. So I encourage people to come back, early and often over the next few months as we roll those things out. But there's also, I think what, in our YouTube viewer described as a rabbit hole, another term for that is serendipity, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is you never quite know. And you gave an example of that. You stumbled across a post on LinkedIn, you followed the links, and it led you in a new direction, right? And so I wish, for my answer to that question to our friend on YouTube is I wish I knew, which things were serendipitous, door-opening, transformative experiences, which are just rabbit holes, and I'm not sure you know it until you see it. Right? Is that your experience?
Serendipity is my favorite word.
Oh, great.
Yeah. 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 I feel that that's what guides me personally.
And
Yeah.
so when do you
Yeah.
turn from serendipity to structure? That's probably what people who are, the difference between a creative person with entrepreneurial ambitions and an entrepreneur like yourself. So how do you turn from serendipity to structure?
I don't even know how to answer that question because I feel like these things go hand in hand.
Okay.
You've heard those sayings around, like opportunity comes when you're ready. And, you know, and things like that. So I see it very much like that. I mean, day to day as a company, for example, we have a plan, that needs to be structured, right? But I also typically say that we have, an emergent strategy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, yes, we have this plan and we're supposed to, what we think we should do is go down this path. But at the same time, we're taking in information, to see if there's new data that says maybe there's something we can change, right? Sometimes the thing that makes you change that strategy is what we can call serendipity, because something catches you and then it brings together this other thing that you had learned, but it allows you to see it in a new way, or it opens up a path for you to go further that you wouldn't even have foreseen yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's about, turning from structure to serendipity. I mean, I think these things coexist.
No. Right. Oh, fantastic. That's great advice. So this is related in some ways to a question that came in from Nima. And so Nima is asking, in today's sort of world, sort of fast-moving, high-tech world, right? How can someone best learn quickly, right? And then maybe I'd also ask you to reflect on what are the things that you think people need to be learning right now?
Mhm. That's a good question. Hi, Nima. Yeah, and I think they're kind of related. So how do you learn quickly? Um, I think you learn quickly by training yourself to learn in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just noticed something this week. Like I was in a board meeting and I hadn't read the board pack on time, and I felt very, very guilty because that's a very bad thing. And I opened up, it was like 46 pages. And I was able to go through all the pages in a relatively short time, and I ended up asking the most questions in that particular meeting. And I was actually surprised by myself, and I realized, oh, once upon a time when I was in grad school, I was reading, 100 pages a night, right? And because I used to read 100 pages a night, now I can go through, half of that in a very quick period. So I think learning fast is just training yourself to learn, and creating maybe environments of focus while you're learning so that you can absorb what you're learning, because then you're going to feel better and you're going to notice that you're learning, and then it's just going to get easier and easier. I think learning is just a muscle, like,
Mm-hmm.
like anything else. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you also need, of course, like things like a clear mind and that sort of thing, so understanding the kinds of environments that allow you to learn better, because for example, if you've slept well, you're going to learn quicker,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Or maybe if you had coffee, I don't know.
Right.
And then I drink a lot of
Yeah.
coffee. And then so the other question was, what should people learn now? I have sort of two reactions to that, and I think even something on the previous question. So I'm not one of these people who is a fan of like learning fads. Like I am anti them.
Mm-hmm.
Like in this last decade, when folks that were just like everyone should learn how to code, the last 10 to 15 years, I'm like, come on. You know, we need people who are creative. We need people who can market. We need people who understand philosophy and psychology and so on. Like they're very, very
Mm-hmm.
important, even in very, very technical areas. Um, so when I say that, I think it's difficult for me to pick what someone should learn, because I think people should learn the things that they enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Otherwise, it's not. I mean, you can know a lot and do nothing with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then if I had to pick something to learn right now, it's, I really, really dislike this buzz of AI,
Mm-hmm.
especially as a CS person. The term is misused and that sort of a thing, but we cannot deny the super fast pace of things. Like we just cannot deny it. Right. So if there's anything I would say somebody needs to learn now is about the technologies that are completely reshaping our landscape because they're affecting us and will affect us whether we like it or not. And we just have to get on board with them, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think those are going to transform every workplace, right? At the
Yeah.
same time, I couldn't agree more, right? The importance that you've identified of people learning in all different directions, right, and following their passions, whether they're in psychology and economics and marketing, all those fields that you mentioned. So this brings us, I think, to the final question, which is directed at you. What will you be looking to learn the next time you visit MIT OpenCourseWare?
Well, outside of the how to speak,
Yeah, yeah.
that's the immediate thing I'm going to look for.
Great, that's fantastic.
So that's the immediate thing I'm going to look for. But outside of that, still very interested in the sort of like the behavior things. And then I need to use statistics, and I did not like statistics. Once upon a time, I need to brush up. So it's just brushing up on, on previous knowledge still, just because of my day-to-day work.
Right. Okay. Well, that's fantastic. And I hope you have some good experiences the next time you visit MIT OpenCourseWare.
Always.
All right.
Always.
So this was a wonderful conversation with you, June, and I just want to thank all of you who've joined online or elsewhere for joining at this conversation, sharing your experiences either now or in other formats. And I think we all share the enthusiasm that June brings to learning, to her creativity, that she brings to her work, and I'm really glad that we've been able to share this with the world. And I welcome you on behalf of all of Open Learning to stay in touch and to keep learning with MIT OpenCourseWare and all of our Open Learning offerings. And encourage you to consider supporting our work by sharing the resources that you encounter with your friends and family and colleagues, by sharing your own experiences and your story directly with us at the ways that MIT's Open Learning resources have transformed your personal journey to learning and to career transformation. And finally, for those of you who are in a position to do so, we encourage and invite you to consider making a donation that would support our efforts and help us bring these to the rest of the world as effectively as we possibly can. So for now, I'm going to just say a final thank you to June Odongo and to everyone who joined us online. Until our next conversation, keep learning. Thanks very much.